The Sister Rose Thiering Fund for Education in Jewish Christian Studies welcomes you to the third annual Dr. Marcia Robbins Wilf Lecture on Sunday, March 23, 2014 at 2 p.m. Special guests, Sister Mary C. Boyes and Blue Greenberg, Women of Faith. The lecture takes place in Jubilee Auditorium at Seton Hall University.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Deborah Lerner-Duane. I'm chairman of the Sister Rose Thiering Fund for Education in Jewish Christian Studies, and I want to welcome you all to the third annual Dr. Marcia Robbins Wilf Lecture. We're just delighted to have everybody here for a very, very interesting program. Like all corporations and all nonprofits, the Sister Rose Thiering Fund has a mission statement. And our mission is a simple one that's very important. We advance the legacy of Sister Rose Thiering by fostering understanding and cooperation among Jews, Christians, and people of other religious traditions through advocacy and education. What do? We give scholarships. This year, in the academic year, we've given more than $50,000 to more than 20 students in the Jewish Christian Studies program here at Seton Hall. We've got a number of students and former students here with us today. I'll name them. If you're here and you want to wave, feel free. Piotr Dudek, who's a current student, who was at the desk there. Liz Cassiano, who's in the back. Janet Malbach, who's also at the desk. Mary Vasquez, who's a current board member and chair of our scholarship committee. Renee Kessler, Miriam Pellet, who graduated with me 2 years ago, and Christine Shire, who is, along with her husband George, are hugely supportive of everything we do. But what else do we do? And Ellen Hayes, where are you? Oh, Ellen, hello, okay. Welcome. Among the other things the fund does is we have the Dr. Marcia Robbins Wilf Lecture, which is another way in which we get our message out and advocate for what we're doing. We have an annual essay competition for high school students every year, where we ask students throughout the state of New Jersey to watch the Academy Award nominated documentary Sister Rose's Passion, and to come up with their own perceptions and their own reflections on that film. We've received hundreds of applications and essays so far this year, and on June 1st, we're going to recognize the winners in this room. These are children who bring their families, their parents. Many of them are first-generation Americans, and they come here and they learn more about us, more about Sister Rose, and all about what we do, and they also learn about Seton Hall University. Our board is developing relationships with different departments and programs here at the university, hoping in the future we'll be able to co-sponsor activities and events with them. And among those things is 60 years of building bridges, which was a brainchild of Paul Gibbons, our most immediate past chair, which was put together to commemorate Seton Hall's own pioneering work in developing Jewish-Catholic dialogue following Vatican II. We worked, Monsignor Osterreicher worked with David Bossman, our executive director, Father Lawrence Frizzell, who's on faculty here with Jewish Christian Studies, Sister Rose, of course, and Rabbi Asher Finkel, who is retired now from the Jewish Christian Studies Department. I want to especially thank today the Seton Hall chapter of the ZBT fraternity, Zeta Beta Tau. They've been working with us for a couple of years. They volunteer at all our events, they help us out when they can. But the real interesting thing is ZBT is a Jewish fraternity, and to have a chapter here on the Seton Hall campus says everything about who we are, what we do, and what the fraternity is. It was founded, I found out this morning when I Googled, it was founded as a youth Zionist organization on the Columbia University campus in 1898. But it's always tickled me so to have ZBT brothers here with us. Our vision is to imagine a world without religious prejudice, and the Sister Rose Thiering Fund is ready to take advantage of opportunities and accept the challenges that go along with that. I'd like to now pass the program along to Ann Bergmeyer, who is the Secretary of the Sister Rose Steering Fund Board and one of our program co-chairs. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Ann Bergmeyer, and I'm a secretary, but I really don't type very well. In 2009, Dr. Marcia Robbins Wilf, a trustee of the Sister Rose Steering Fund, endowed the lecture series that bears her name. Her vision for the series is to present meaningful speakers and programs that will further the work of the late Sister Rose, whose lifelong efforts built important bridges of understanding, compassion, and trust between Christians and Jews. Today we bring you the third in the series. Our first was in 2011, where we had Senator Robert Menendez, who addressed the topic of Sister Rose's legacy. In 2013, we had Dr. Michael Berenbaum and Dr. John Polakowski, who talked about Jewish-Christian relations since Nostra Aetate. Deborah mentioned our vision, but I think this needs a repetition. It's quite striking, in my opinion. Can you imagine a world without religious prejudice? It's a tall order, but that's our goal. I believe we can sum up our mission on today's lecture with one word: communications. We want to have a dialogue and a conversation. To that end, we've invited two people who would be described as women of faith, better yet, as bridge builders. They would give a candid conversation today about Jewish-Christian relations, past and present, as well as some memoirs about Sister Rose Steering, her legacy and her life, as reflected especially in our organization, the Sister Rose Steering Fund. Dr. David Bossman, who is a professor at Seton Hall and the executive director of the of the Sister Rose Steering Fund, will give some opening remarks, as well as Dr. Anthony Cigliatano, also professor at Seton Hall and the chairman of the Department of Religion, will introduce our speakers and moderate the conversation thereafter. Thank you.
Well, we can't just do a mission statement and a vision statement without doing the value statement. We also have values. We've worked on these for several months, actually, trying to hone them down and say succinctly what they're really about. So our vision is a world without religious prejudice, and our values are to value differences, not just to tolerate them, but to value them. To demonstrate courage. This was one of the discussions at our retreat with the Sister Rose Steering Fund. How do we encapsulate Sister Rose in what we're doing? And we encapsulated her as demonstrating courage. She received the award from the National Conference of Catholic Nuns, which was a giraffe. Do you remember that, receiving the giraffe? And it's for nuns who stick their necks out. We're also building bridges, and the bridge building image was something that Monsignor Osterreicher started here with his Bridges series. But we're trying to continue building bridges and not tearing them down, finding ways of uniting and joining forces with other people, cooperative efforts, and then create dialogue, not waiting for it to happen. I remember Rabbi Kalinicki said we've got to get beyond the tea and crumpets stage of Jewish Catholic dialogue. So that's what we're trying to do. We're creating dialogue. And finally, and I think this is one that's very close to the heart of Sister Rose, and that is inspire the next generation. Sister Rose was very focused on young people. And Sister Rose's passion, you could see she was always working with young people, dealing with the current issues about that young people are involved in, passing the torch to a younger generation. We're concerned about that for our board membership. We're concerned about that for our activities, to reach out to young people. And as Deborah pointed out, The essay contest is a way of doing that. Sister Rose's Passion has been available now in all the schools of New Jersey, and we're asking children to write essays on how Sister Rose inspired them in their lives. And there's nothing like thinking something through by writing about it. So we're getting wonderful essays, and that's been very, very successful for us. So we're inspiring the next generation. Well, today it's really very much of a family affair. Blue Greenberg and Sister Rose are very close, Blue and Yitz, and very, very close throughout her life. And Mary Boyce, Sister Mary Boyce, is one of the featured speakers in Sister Rose's Passion, talking about the movie, Mel Gibson's film. And I've got just a quick quote that I got online. There was some question about whether Sister Mary or Professor Mary Boyce should be a Catholic spokesman for the Diocese of Cleveland. It says, the diocese has updated its website to claim that Sister Mary Boyce is a Roman Catholic woman whose credentials in Catholic theology and dialogue with Judaism are excellent, and will give a keynote address at this annual event sponsored by the Interfaith Commission of the Diocese of Cleveland and the Anti-Defamation League. So she comes with a notable history, not just this, but in many aspects. So we're very privileged to have members of the family, and of course, Dr. Shigitano, chairman of the religion department, of which the Jewish Christian Studies program now is a part. We're now the graduate component of the religion department. We're very privileged to have you facilitate.
Thanks, David. It is a great honor and privilege to introduce our interlocutors today for a dialogue among women of faith in a setting, in fact, sponsored by a most generous woman of faith, Dr. Marcia Robbins Wilf, and by the Sister Rose Thering Fund. In 1958, the Swiss Catholic theologian Hans-Urs von Balthasar wrote a small book entitled Martin Buber and Christianity, a dialogue between Israel and the Church. That, at least, is the English title. The German includes a word left untranslated in the English, Einsamer, or lonely. If Jewish thinkers such as Martin Buber and Franz Rosenzweig have been the fathers of the dialogical principle, rooted in God's formation of Israel and covenant relation, Christians, on Balthasar's view, had failed to participate. The dialogue had been a lonely one. But today, because of the courage and generosity of people such as Sister Rose, Monsignor Osterreicher, Gregory Baum, Rabbis Finkel and Brill, Fathers Frizzell and Bossman, and of course today, and for some time now, Dr. Mary Boyce and Blue Greenberg, this dialogue is far less lonely. Long ago, a professor said to our class, it is no challenge to find agreement between two people who believe very little. The challenge is to come to understanding between people of committed faith. So it is a special honor to have Dr. Mary Boyce and Blue Greenberg with us as deeply committed members of their religious communities and deeply committed participants in interfaith dialogue. Sister Mary Boyce is Dean of Academic Affairs at Union Theological Seminary in Manhattan, where she has been the Skinner and McAlpin Professor of Practical Theology since 1994. Prior to this appointment, she was on the faculty of Boston College for 17 years. She received her master's and doctorate from Columbia in a joint program with Union Theological, where she now serves as academic dean. She's received honorary doctorates from Hebrew College, Jewish Institute of Religion. She authored 5 books. Her most recent, on the back table, by the way, is called Redeeming Our Sacred Story, the Death of Jesus and Relations Between Jews and Christians. Very nice. And this was published last year. I owe a special debt of gratitude to Dr. Boyce for her willingness to review the Department of Religion a few years ago, and she did a beautiful job for us was extremely helpful, and I really look forward to her talk today on where Christian Jewish Catholic dialogue is and really where it needs to be. Blue Greenberg, author, activist, and co-founder of the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance, is committed to building bridges between women of various faiths. She holds a master's degree in clinical psychology from the City University of New York, a master's of science in Jewish history from Yeshiva University, and has been honored for her work, particularly in Israel. Among her most widely read books are On Women and Judaism, A View from Tradition, and Black Bread Poems After the Holocaust. Ms. Greenberg and her husband, Rabbi Irving Greenberg, were close friends of the late Sister Rose, for whom the Sister Rose Thering Fund for Education in Jewish Christian Studies is named. Both Blue and Yitz Greenberg will be honored on May 4th as founders of the Sister Rose Thering Fund. While I've only spoken on the phone with Blue in this last week, I would like to share with you a brief paragraph from one of her essays entitled My Interfaith Friendships, Blessings and Challenges, that I found particularly beautiful. She writes at the end of the essay, "Moreover, I believe that the cross-faith encounters have made me a better human being, less insulated to the suffering of others, and less inured to their pain. Simply put, I feel more connected to the world. When I read about the Tamils in danger, I remember the sweet Tamil man I met in Guyana years earlier who had fled from persecution and torture and who worried about his extended family. I worried about them too. Worry is a form of prayer. For me, that is the constant phenomenology of dialogue, a quickening of my Jewish soul, an expansion of my mind, and an opening of my heart." Now I give you Blue Greenberg.
Thank you so much for that generous introduction. Sister Rose would have liked this forum. She always wanted to bring Christians and Jews together in conversation. I first met Sister Rose in 1967 when she organized a dialogue at Barrett College in Lake Forest, Illinois, a dialogue between nuns, priests, and rabbis. I was there as a rabbi's wife and the mother of 5 children who fell in love with Sister Rose and maintained that relationship for all their lives, for all of her life. Sister Rose would have liked this dialogue. She would have appreciated hearing the topic that we are going to be taking up, the unfinished business of the deicide charge, which actually we have to thank Sister Mary for. It took several conversations with the committee until Mary zeroed in on this. Sister Rose would have loved this conversation because she always wanted to go right to the core issue. And post-Holocaust dialogue was past time for superficial conversation. One of her most favorite phrases and guiding principles of her life was, "Now what are we going to do about this?" Whatever the problem was. I grew up in Seattle, Washington during World War II. One morning, at the age of 8, as I walked to school with my 2 sisters, ages 6 and 10, some kids on the next block stood on their porch and yelled out to us, "Hey girls, are you Jewish?" We said, "Yes." They said, "Ooh, you killed Jesus Christ." Returning home for lunch that afternoon, we asked our mother, "Who is Jesus Christ?" My mother was startled by our question. "Why are you asking?" And we said, "Because we killed him." That was my introduction to Christianity. My sister recalled that at the first hearing of the deicide charge that I looked down at my white shoes and I said to her, "But I don't have any blood on my shoes." I was certainly an 8-year-old confused about this charge. I knew an elderly, kind, and wonderful neighbor, Mrs. Grant, across the street, who was not Jewish, yet had a deep relationship with my parents. I also knew I could not ride my bike on Mary Jane's Corner, because no Jews were allowed on her corner. But this was the very first time I had heard of Jesus Christ, or even Jesus, as Orthodox Jews are forbidden to say the word Christ. All of this that I'm telling you is a great improvement over the story of my grandfather, who repeated when I was a teenager that the Jews of his town, himself included, stayed indoors during Easter and the reading of the Passion story. In fact, in an odd way, I owe my life to the deicide charge. After a pogrom in his Austro-Hungarian town against the satanic Christ killers, my grandfather, age 26, who was a yeshiva student, a father of one child, and my father in utero, was given a ticket by his aunt, he was an orphan, who said it was no place for a Jewish family to grow up. And so my grandfather left for the United States, and a year later brought my grandmother over. And we owe our lives to that pogrom because all of his relatives who stayed behind perished in the Holocaust. This was the world in which Sister Rose grew up. She was born in 1920 in Plain, Wisconsin, on a Catholic farm, in a Catholic farm family. There were no Jews anywhere in sight. She once told us that she remembered when a Jewish pharmacist moved into the region and there was a great deal of whispering. She remembered in general whispering of the word Jew, even by her father, who was a good and compassionate man, as if it was something off limits, a forbidden concept. She often gave credit to her mother, who told her that all people were God's creatures and Jews were not evil. Her mother communicated great interfaith respect and compassion. At the tender age of 16, Rose entered the convent, and became a Dominican sister of Racine Dominicans. When she completed her studies, she became a teacher in a Catholic parochial school, and she was shocked to see the extent of anti-Semitism in the textbooks. These were the years in which she was engaging the Holocaust, and she connected the dots, and it created great conflict in the life, mind, and heart of a deeply religious young woman. And so she decided to write her doctoral thesis on Jews in Catholic textbooks. She produced an amazing work, and when she presented it to her seniors, the Bishop of St. Louis told her to keep the information from the public eye because it was harmful to the church. But he did not know Rose's theory. Though she was very young, she simply ignored the warning, carried the information to the Vatican, which was then deliberating the reconciliation between Jews and Christians and creating the language of Nostra Aetate. And many have acknowledged that Sister Rose's work played an important role in the cleaning up of Catholic textbooks, parochial school textbooks in the United States. And I have to say that Jewish children of this generation today do not have to be afraid of the deicide charge any longer, thanks to, in great measure, the work of Sister Rose. As a religious Christian, Sister Rose did not stop with textbooks or rest on her laurels. She understood that anti-Semitism had created a climate in which bystanders in the Holocaust, and mostly Christians, could rationalize and justify looking away from evil. And she felt an obligation, a personal obligation, as a woman of faith to make amends. It wasn't enough for her to try to stop the sources of demonization, but she actually wanted to undo the damage. And how did she see her role there? By helping Jews in straits wherever they were. Sister Rose wrote 1,000 letters. I don't know whether you have those letters. Do you have all of her letters that she wrote over the course of her lifetime? Wherever she spotted some injustice or something that she felt was unfair to Jews, she wrote a protest letter. She didn't care that some of her church fellows criticized her for her attacks on the church or on Christian and Muslim anti-Semitism, or she didn't care that sometimes she was called a Jew lover. She took that as a definition of pride. When she learned that Kurt Waldheim was elected to be president of Austria, she journeyed to Vienna. She was strip searched there, and that did not stop her. She was fearless. She continued to picket. She went to dozens of Soviet Jewry rallies over her lifetime to speak for Christian support for the freedom of Soviet Jews. Sister Rose introduced mandatory Holocaust education in New Jersey, and that model was followed by public schools all over the United States, by states who mandated that all over the United States. Her fierce protection of Israel was born of the same desire to make amends for her precious church. I remember her saying that it bothered her when her Christian friends would refer to Israel as the Holy Land. She would say Israel, say Israel. It was important to her that her Christian community understand that Israel was a living, breathing country that offered renewal and safe haven and protection for Jews, not an ancient historical biblical land. When I participated in an educators conference at Yad Vashem in Israel a number of years ago, I met many of her former students. Sister Rose organized 33 missions to Israel of educators, and they continued to work in her path. As part of her journey to make amends, but also to I can't read my writing, and I can't remember my thoughts, so I'll have to skip that one. She came to understand and experience Judaism, and to appreciate the influence of early Judaism on Christianity and on Jesus. She loved celebrating Shabbat. She came to our home many times for Shabbat, and she loved Shabbat not only for the experience, but she loved knowing that this was the Shabbat that her beloved Jesus had celebrated. These things were very important to her. All of this, even as she criticized the turn against Judaism that the church had taken over the course of many centuries. It's quite understandable that Sister Rose was greatly admired and dearly loved by so many Jews and Jewish communities all over the United States, not just in New Jersey. At the end of her life, she was taken well care of by the Jewish community and actually spent her last years in a home run by the Federation of New Jersey, of Morris County Federation. But her work is not over. Her work, which was to make amends, to tell the truth about the teachings of contempt, to take care of Jews and take care of Israel, is not finished. Sister Mary Boyce has addressed this and in her new book, and other researchers and scholars during the last 50 years have done so as well. And a huge task remains regarding the sacred texts concerning Jews and Judaism. And I want to begin with an anecdote. Excuse me, may I have my cup of water? Thank you. That took place in a classroom in which I was teaching in the 60s and 70s. This took place in 73. A very fine student, Jean D. But it was an anecdote that has been repeated throughout the years. Jean decided and elected to prepare her paper on the historical Jesus and his relationship to the Jewish community. I had recommended to her a half a dozen books that reflected the new ecumenical teachings and spirit, works such as David Flusser's Jesus and Albert Schweitzer's The Quest of the Historical Jesus Jules Isaac, Jesus and Israel, and numerous texts that were part of the new scholarship, that were part of the reconciliation and very important works in bringing Jews and Christians together. At the end of the term, Jean presented her paper before the class. She cited experiences such as Jesus growing up in the Jewish community, Jesus being taken to the temple at age 13 for his bar mitzvah, Jesus preaching in the synagogue. Then followed her analysis of his 3 ministries. Interspersed throughout her presentation were such statements as, the Pharisees opposed Jesus in all his ministries. The Pharisees hated Jesus because he was trying to teach a new message of love and concern for the people. The Pharisees felt great hostility towards him because he was gaining increasing popularity with the masses. They tried to trick and trap him, and when they failed, they made plans to kill him. The Jewish leaders sent a mob of Jews who tortured him, tore his clothing, mocked him, raked him over the thorns, and threw stones at him. These statements were interwoven with many positive statements about Jesus, his charisma, his disciples, his positive teachings, in contrast to the legalism of the Pharisees on issues such as healing on the Sabbath and fasting, his resurrection and ascension. Jesus' followers were always the crowd, the people, the multitudes. His disciples, his followers, never the Jews. I must confess that Jean's paper caught me quite by surprise. If I had heard it in any other context, and I have, I would not have raised an eyebrow in wonder, but the paper followed a semester of reading the New Christian Ecumenical Scholarship, which by 1973 had already been nicely developed. It also followed several lectures on the Pharisees and the Pharisaic Revolution, and these lectures focused on the creativity and innovativeness of the Pharisees and their emphasis on the dignity of the individual, their love of the common man, common person, their belief that each individual was created in the image of God, and their emphasis on godliness and goodness in everyday life and actions. I gave examples of Pharisaic teachings and jurisprudence, and where appropriate, the similarity between the teachings of Jesus and the teachings of the Pharisees. In one session, we did a line-by-line analysis of the Sermon on the Mount and its parallel sources in rabbinic teachings. I also explained that rabbinic Judaism, which had carried the Jews from those times into modern times, has been essentially Pharisaic Judaism. In other words, I told them I could appropriately describe myself as a disciple and descendant of the Pharisees. And yet here it was, a few days or weeks later, that I sat there essentially accused. I was a Pharisee, a Jew, on trial once more for the crime of deicide. Those were my brothers and sisters in that mob, and it didn't matter at that moment that Jesus was also my brother, as were his disciples and followers. What had happened? What had happened? Despite the background materials from the early lectures, despite Jean's open-mindedness and goodwill, despite the excellent supplementary materials she had read, the negative forces within the gospel tradition were so very powerful that to a believing and intelligent Christian, they were virtually impossible to overcome or to set aside or to bracket. It became clear to me through my subsequent discussions of the matter and through similar incidents that there was a fundamental truth in Jean's point. It was simply impossible to reject the sacredness and authority of the Gospels. And I have to admit that had I been in that same situation, I would have reacted the same way. My conclusion at the time, drawn from the lessons of history and admittedly the counsel of desperation, was that the Gospels needed a red pencil. Somewhat naively, I thought that the task for Christians was to excise and edit out those parts which had become for Jews the Gospels of hate. However, I soon realized, it didn't take long to realize the folly of that. Again, I would have reacted with affront if anybody had suggested to me to take out part of my sacred tradition, part of my canon. And yet, for Jews, a straight reading of the Gospels was, and remains a threat, a danger, because this is the canon, these are the sacred texts. My second round of thinking was to look at Judaism as a model for handling problematic texts and correcting what could lead to a continuous threat. What was the model in Judaism? Judaism is a religion of two Torahs, the written Torah and the oral Torah. So central are the teachings of the rabbis that you can't really understand the written Torah, the 5 books of Moses, without the commentary, without the oral tradition, without biblical exegesis. That begins at a very early age in the Jewish community. Children are taught Torah with midrash, exegetical material, with Rashi, a commentary, a medieval commentator who takes from the oral Torah and analyzes the written word. And it is true for the student of Torah and for the lay and student and the scholar alike that it's almost hard for the mind and the memory to distinguish between what is written and oral traditions. Of course, everybody understands what is the layer. It's not, you can't avoid seeing the different layers. But somehow the mind fluctuates and the memory fluctuates between the two traditions, which are conflated in an understanding of our sacred texts. As I said, beginning at a very young age, one hardly ever studies sacred scriptures without commentary. And you can go into any synagogue in the world and find and pick up the Bible, the book of the Bible, and you will find either at the bottom, below these scriptures, the written Torah, you will find a commentary below the line or on the side of the page, particularly when it comes to problematic texts. So my humble suggestion to continue the work of Sister Rose and of all the important scholars who have addressed this problem in their work is for the church to establish, the establishment church, I should say, to take upon itself to do in the 21st century what other Jews of the first century did, and that is become a religion of two Torahs, the latter informing and reforming as a matter of justice the teachings that grew out of the parting of the ways that we have continued for much too long. So that the corrective work, the work such as that of Sister Mary Boyce, that work in the world will find its way into the minds of the children and grandchildren of the Jeans, just as the work of Sister Rose on anti-Semitism and the parochial school educators has informed the work of parochial school educators and the children in those schools in 1,000 different places. It won't be easy to do this. It won't be quick. And I have to say that it took the Jewish people several hundred years to create an oral tradition that had the weight and value to be considered an oral Torah. So it won't be quick to do this, to create a quasi-canonical work, which is what I am talking about, but I think it will be important and effective and should begin now. Thank you.
Thank you, Blue. When we had a conversation with the organizers of this afternoon, we agreed that the two of us would work somewhat informally back and forth. So I am not going to read a text. I know that's a disappointment for those of you who like boring academic papers. So my response is in part planned. I sent Blue an outline, but it's also something sort of in the moment. And it's such a privilege for me to be here with Blue and to be at Seton Hall. I knew Sister Rose, although not nearly as well as Blue. And I'm mindful that Seton Hall has an incredible legacy in terms of its institute founded by Monsignor Osterreicher and carried on by Father Frizzell, so that this is a place that does very important things to create reconciliation between Jews and Christians. I also grew up in Seattle, but I'm just generationally in a little different place. We had a very close Jewish friend who was a part of our family She had no other relatives in the area, and so any event in our family was an event in which Pauline Lee showed up. It might have been Christmas or Easter, it might have been the 4th of July, or certainly it was for our birthdays. She was positioned between my grandparents' generation and my parents, so she was just like an aunt to me. And I should tell you what she did. She was a businesswoman. My German-born grandfather helped her to get into business, and he also advised her she should change her name from Pauline Solomon to Pauline Lee because of the anti-Semitism that did exist. And she ran a very high-end candy store. And when Pauline arrived at our house, or my grandparents' house, where we usually met almost every Sunday, there would be a huge box, licorice for the women, somehow it goes down the maternal line, fudge and divinity for my father, cashews, so on and so on. So what was not to like about Jews? I had an entirely, but it was, as a child, the first time I knew about something called anti-Semitism. It's very foggy now how this all, but my mother explained to me why Pauline had changed her name, and that sort of took root in my consciousness. In my years growing up in the Pacific Northwest, the tensions were principally between Catholics and Protestants. But coming from a family in which my father was not religiously affiliated, and my mother, though a lifelong practicing Catholic, there wasn't really a sense of our religious superiority, or we, in a sense, got along very well with our various neighbors, many of whom were Protestants, others not religiously affiliated at all. And I was in high school during the years of Vatican II. Please don't start trying to figure out, And it was that opening of the church to other religious traditions that I think in many ways is at the heart of my own vocation. And I still have a photo because it's in my high school yearbook. We had a session, there was a synagogue about a mile and a half from, less than that, a mile from where I went to high school. And we invited the youth group from the synagogue to come and spend an afternoon with us. And we had a very formal tea afterwards. And there's still a photo of that in my, as I said, in my yearbook. And I'm very pleased and proud that in 1965, this was somehow on our horizon. Which reminds me of a story I heard from a rabbi friend of mine. He grew up in a family that was really riven by divorce. His parents had had an extraordinarily contentious divorce. And so as a child, he simply had to learn to live with the acrimony that existed between his parents. But that was the reality he knew, and that was the reality to which he adjusted. Some 25 years after his parents divorced, they reconciled and remarried. And he said that was the most difficult thing for him. He knew how to function when there was enmity. He didn't know how to function when there was reconciliation. And he told us that story as something of what he felt in trying now to work with Christians. He knew, in a sense, how to set his face, as it were, toward Christians when we were enemies. But he didn't really know how to function when Christians were reaching out in more reconciling ways. And one of the things many things in which Blue and I are agreed, is that there is so much work yet to be done. And I'd just like to take up a piece of that in reference to the charge that Jews are responsible for the death of Jesus. And just to clarify a little bit, I realize that those of us who kind of work in religious spheres and interreligious spheres we use our own kind of vocabulary, and probably normal people don't really talk about deicide. I mean, it's not the kind of thing that comes up in a cocktail party, for instance. At least it would be very strange. So deicide is the charge that really comes in the late 2nd century from a bishop by the name of Melito, who was at Sardis in modern-day Turkey. And he gave a very, very powerful sermon in terms of rhetoric. It's an extraordinary piece of literature. It wouldn't be the kind of sermon you could give in our time, but it's just a beautiful piece and incredibly dangerous because he just builds up this momentum. And it's in this that he accuses the Jews, not simply in killing Jesus, but in killing Jesus, they have killed God. And so that is the history of the deicide charge. But as Blue has pointed out, the charge that Jews are responsible for the death of Jesus is all through the New Testament, and it's particularly in the Gospels, which are the texts that are proclaimed with the most solemnity in most Christian churches. We, of course, in the Christianity being a very large and diverse family, there are many ways of worship. But in most traditions that have a formal liturgy, the Gospel would be the third and the most important of the readings of the day each Sunday. So we are in the season of Lent. Those of you who are a little familiar with Christian liturgy, this actually is the third Sunday of Lent. And we follow also in the Catholic tradition, we too follow a lectionary, although unlike Jewish lectionaries, which are continuous, reading through the books in order, we read somewhat, we have a little pastiche. So we have a reading, generally speaking, from the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament, then a reading usually from one of Paul's letters, and then a gospel text. And usually the gospel text and the first reading are supposed to, in a sense, kind of be related to one another. So a number of years ago, quite a number of years ago now, I was at one of these scholars' events between a very large synagogue, a Reformed synagogue in Boca Raton, Florida. I mean, first Sunday of Lent, it's March. You can imagine how noble it was for me to go to Florida in March. And I was with a Jewish scholar, Alan Middleman. And it was the tradition of this church and this synagogue to have the Catholic speaker preach at some of the masses on Sunday. To give you an idea of how big this particular congregation was, there were 13 services between Saturday night and Sunday morning. So I preached at 5 of them, by which time I never ever wanted to hear my own voice again. And the reading for the fourth Sunday of Lent is a very powerful reading, kind of a strange narrative in some ways, from the 9th chapter of the Gospel of John, which is usually known as the story of the man born blind. And the reading that, I hadn't thought about this story for a number of years now, so if I get some of the details wrong, read my Has God Only Blessing, it's in there, I could get it right. But at any rate, details are details, they're not so important. So the first reading is from 1 Samuel, and I think the line that's meant to echo the gospel is, "For God sees not as humans see." It has to do with the choice of David. And in this particular passage from the 9th chapter of John's Gospel, you have a man born blind, and it's a very clever kind of literary setup where you have all of these sort of busybodies who wonder, why was he born blind? What did he do, or what did his parents do? And the blind man doesn't exactly come across as a great theologian. It's kind of like, I don't know. And then, at any rate, his parents come, and they're asked, "So, is this your son? Because this man, Jesus, just healed him." And they said, "Well, we don't know. You ask him how this happened." And then there's you can see that the editor or the author or the narrator has inserted an explanatory note. His parents said this because they were afraid that they would be expelled from the synagogue. At any rate, Jesus has cured the blind man, and the blind man finally comes to some sort of faith in Jesus. But it's the whole thing of the power of God to give us light and so forth. You could do a lot of things with it in terms of sermon. But I was mindful that particularly at the sort of the principal Mass on Sunday morning, where you had not only sort of the largest number of congregants, but you also had the Jewish choir singing, just as the Catholic choir had sung at the Shabbat service on Friday evening, which is really a very lovely custom. So one of the things that I noted, that not only were there maybe, say, 40 Jews present as the choir, but interspersed in the congregation were a number of Jews who had come as spouses or friends to support them. So in each of the masses in which I preached, I tried to give a very brief explanation of why this sort of hostile note seems to be in the text. And at the end of the first times I preached, the first 4 occasions, people filed out, thank you, blah, blah, whatever we say. But when the Jews were present at that principal mass, so many people stopped me and said, thank you. I was so embarrassed when I heard the gospel read. And my point here is that we Christians have become so accustomed to Jews playing kind of either a villainous role or a hostile role or minimally a questioning role in our text that we don't hear the problem. So I would invite Christians who are here that when the gospel is proclaimed, imagine yourself standing next to a Jewish friend. And how would you feel if that text were proclaimed? And perhaps it would be made more bearable were the homily to explain something. Not explain it away, but to situate it in context. Because it's particularly the texts that deal with culpability for the death of Jesus that has proved so problematic across time. So in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which are quite similar to one another, although have their variations, none of them is a historical account in the sense of a transcript or history as we would write it today. They're all from a later generation. Probably the first Gospel was written around the year 70, death of Jesus in 30, 33, depending on how we figure this out. So at least a 40-year or so. When I say lapse, I don't really mean it in a negative sense, but so there are more reflections on the meaning of Jesus for particular communities. And in those 3 Gospels, the people who are sort of principally involved are the Pharisees, scribes, and elders of the people. They seem to be the agitators, and then toward the end they're involved with the high priests and bringing Jesus to Pilate and so forth. In the Gospel of John, which is the most sort of, I think, elegant from a literary point of view, and also sort of the most difficult, because Jesus goes into abstractions rather quickly at times. The responsibility for the death of Jesus is simply put on the Jews, in Greek, hoi Judaikoi. Now, many would say that probably means something more like the Judeans, but unfortunately, as the text gets translated and read, it's simply the Jews. And there's some very puzzling things in the Gospel of John. In the 20th chapter of John, after the death and now after the resurrection of Jesus, you have this very curious text in which the disciples are locked in an upper room. And why are they locked? Again, an explanation from the narrator, for fear of the Jews. Now, what's peculiar about that? So who's in the room? It's the disciples. They're all Jews. So there's something, in other words, what the writer of the Gospel of John means by the Jews is not the same thing that we would think of today, where we have a sort of a clear demarcation between Jews and non-Jews, or between Jews and Gentiles. Or, as I was once asked when I was teaching a class at Boston College, could you clarify the difference between a Jew and a Gentile? It's either spelling or sex education that we need, or both. So what happened at the council that made change possible, but hasn't really been carried through, is finally, after all of these generations, the document Nostra Aetate said that Jews, whether the Jews of Jesus' day or the Jews of any other time, should not be blamed as a people for the death of Jesus. Now, many Christians hear that and they think, well, I wasn't really worried about this anyway. I mean, I have to honestly say, I think for most Christians in our world today, we don't give a lot of thought to culpability for the crucifixion. And one of the reasons for that is that we have no idea of the consequences of the Christ killer charge. And my argument, to put it very simply, is that the heart of the theological animus on the part of Christians against Jews is precisely the Christ killer charge. The great gift is that in our time, we have the intellectual resources, that is biblical scholarship, and we certainly, after the Holocaust, have an ethical obligation to explain what happened to the crucifixion in a much more careful kind of way. And there are many resources for doing that. The tragedy is that those resources are more or less untended by people with responsibility for preaching and teaching in many, especially in many kind of average church contexts. So I would accept your challenge about commentary, but I would argue that we, in a sense, we have the commentary, it's just the commentary is not in us. That is to say, we who are Catholics should be reading the passion stories that are in each of the four Gospels in light of Nostra Aetate, the two successor documents, the guidelines and the notes. They all have long titles, but just we'll shorten it. A document from the U.S. bishops called God's Mercy Endures Forever, and then a more recent and unfortunately too lengthy publication, but parts could be excerpted, from the Pontifical Biblical Commission called On the Jewish People and Their Sacred Scriptures in the Christian Bible. These texts provide for us a much larger context in which we can understand our Gospels. And they're really, for the most part, perhaps with the exception of the last document, especially God's Mercy Endures Forever, that's a very accessible document. That is to say, it's just not written in church language that only a few people can understand. But it's been buried. I don't mean anybody buried it in any kind of nefarious attempt to hide the resources, but it simply doesn't come to consciousness. And I guess what my concern is, why is it that we Christians don't feel more obligated to face our history? I guess if I could present you with an analogy, would be how, in view of all of the science studies out there, can people still simply refuse to look at the human connection to climate change? I mean, we can differ on the extent and so on and so forth, but it's to be a denier. And I guess my fear is that Christians, it's a very difficult history that we have vis-a-vis Jews. And yet here we are once again in Lent. Once again on Good Friday, we will hear the Gospel of John proclaimed in a very solemn way. And that charge, it's very dramatic. The charge is rendered in the Gospel of John. And I hardly ever hear someone preach against that text. So my job is to try to teach the teachers, educate the people who will be preaching, what I've done is tried to set up some principles by which one can preach. I mean, one of the powerful things is that the crucifixion was a Roman persecution. It was how the Romans dealt with people that in some way threatened their rule, threatened the emperor's divinity, in a sense. So on the historical level, if we ask, why did Jesus die? He died because he seemed to have been perceived as a threat to the Roman Empire as embodied in the Roman-appointed governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate. That's, by the way, in the creed that Christians recite, both the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed, Pontius Pilate. But unfortunately, over time, we lost the role of crucifixion and the role of Rome in crucifixion, and so those gospel notions of the Jewish culpability were the ones that lingered. If I could just give one example of the function that crucifixion played. So crucifixion was, in one definition, state-sponsored terrorism designed to keep the peasantry passive. It was meant as a deterrent because those who were crucified, and there were thousands of Jews crucified under Rome, maybe hundreds of thousands, we'll never know, but you were hung naked and your body stayed there for days on the cross or on however you were crucified. After Gaddafi was ousted in Libya, there was an interview a couple of years ago in the New York Times in which somebody, a Libyan who was interviewed, said that one of the ways that Gaddafi kept his power, kept the populace in fear, is that people who were regarded as rebels or revolutionaries in any kind of way were hanged in public, and their body was left hanging, and then traffic would be redirected so you had to pass by. I think that is a direct analogy to why crucifixion was so powerful for Rome. So we have really misinterpreted our own Gospels, but we have the resources today to think differently, to preach differently. And so I would like to call on Sister Rose's chutzpah to say that we must do everything we can to get the word out of a different way of interpreting this history that we have with Jews. And finally, I want to thank Blue, even though my own mother has gone to God. When you said worry is a form of prayer, my mother could out-worry any Jewish mother that ever lived. And now I can think of my mother as praying always.
Thank you, and thanks for really wonderful talks, and I think very generative and probably very fruit-bearing talks. So I think we want to open it up now to questions, or maybe also reflections on what each of you said, if you'd like, and but also to questions for anyone. And I'll try and find you quickly so that we can get as many in as possible.
So no, my reaction was, as I was listening to Sister Mary, was, if only there were 1,000 Sister Marys in the world, it would be a different world. Because the issue is how to communicate those teachings. Talking about Union Theological, I had this experience a couple of years ago. It was an interfaith dialogue, and it was with seminarians and Jewish teachers. And one of the things that was so remarkable was how much richer is the field now in terms of reconciliation and historical analysis and analysis, particularly of the deicide charge, how the facts simply don't fit the history of the times and so forth. Not only that crucifixion was a Roman form of punishment, but that Jews had no power over capital punishment by that time, and how comparing the different documents, the different gospel traditions, how they contradict each other. So how much of this is out there already? And these were seminarians who were hearing this for the first time. They had gone through 20 years of Catholic education, ready to become priests, and this was news to them. And then one wondered, what were they going to take home? So it essentially is the problem that you raise of how to disseminate, how to get this into the pews. And I don't know whether much has changed in the last 20 years or 30 years, ever since post-Holocaust literature of reconciliation and has taken root. I don't really know. I don't have a feeling out there for how many Sister Mary boys are there out there working on this. That's another question. And then, you know, who is going to take this into the pews? That is the big question. So, you know, your Sister Rose would be so happy with your work, and she would say, you know, how are we going to fix that problem? How are we going to fix it now? She did, you know, in her lifetime so much to take Holocaust education into the community and Israel, etc. So I see that as our great challenge. As you were talking, I was thinking that you also have a great gift for narrative, and that maybe one of the things that needs to be done, in a certain sense, the Gospels were like popular culture. And maybe we have to create some venues of popular culture that will get these messages out to the masses.
Yes.
This is directed to Sister Mary Boyce. I'm Renee, and I know that Mel Gibson's depiction of the crucifixion was very controversial, and I'd like to know more about what you think of it.
The question had to do with the film, The Passion of the Christ, by Mel Gibson. You may have heard of it. That was a very complicated experience for those of us. There was a group of us who formed as an ad hoc group. There were, I think, 5 Christian scholars and 5 Jewish scholars, and we had been given a copy of a script. I don't know that it was the latest script, but it was a copy of the script, and we wrote an analysis of that in terms of its portrayal. You know, he has artistic license as a filmmaker. My objection, and our objection, was that he said on a number of occasions and to a number of interviewers, this is the most accurate portrayal of the crucifixion, the passion and death of Jesus. And yet, when we read the script, and even worse when we saw the film, there are all kinds of interpolations, all kinds of things that are added in that are not in the Gospels. In the Gospels themselves, very little is made of the physical torment. It's mentioned, Jesus is scourged, he's on the cross, he cries out. But those of you who saw this film know that there's a beating that goes on by a Roman guard that seemed to last forever. And the violence, I mean, that's a characteristic of Mel Gibson's film, is violence. So, at the same time, there were many, many people who were deeply moved by the film, and this is when I point to the complexity. And I did all kinds of panels, and I can't tell you how long I spent on the phone with reporters from People magazine. I'm thinking to myself, I'm not prepared for my class tomorrow for 20 people. And I just spent an hour and a half talking to a reporter for People magazine, but let's face it, a lot of people read People magazine. I mean, every time I get my hair cut, I catch up, but now I don't even know who the people are, and I really could care less, but at any rate. And of course, one of the things is that, with the exception of a very few kinds of magazines and newspapers, the press is pretty ignorant about the Bible. And so trying to do real quick education for people and so forth. But the thing that I think was the most difficult was that many Christians were so moved by the film, by what Jesus suffered, and how not to suggest to them that because they were moved by the film, that didn't make them bad people or anti-Semites. They simply didn't see it. I mean, I could see all, and I have to say, to go and watch a film like that, and people are eating popcorn, I mean, my own piety was challenged by that kind of thing. So, how to help people understand that whatever Mel Gibson says, he was not portraying what the Gospels say. It was Mel Gibson's own gospel. And then to add further to the complexity and my perplexity is that a number of the Catholic bishops, not just in the United States, but in various places in the world, thought that Mel Gibson was doing a great thing in evangelizing. So we actually kind of got in trouble, the Catholic scholars who were part of this, not trouble in any deep sense, but we just got dropped from things after this happened. Because I guess they didn't like it that we were waiting for the episcopacy to lead, but that we had, in a sense, gone out on our own. And so when Mel Gibson had his drunken escapade, and in vino veritas, I confessed to a little schadenfreude, a little rejoicing in his downfall. And I think now his own reputation has been fairly, he's not the great Christian hero I think he was. But it was a film, we were afraid it would do a great deal of damage in terms of what, I mean, it's very odd that you can have these, what Nostra Aetate says, and the successor documents, and then Mel Gibson wraps himself in the cloak of Catholic piety, but in fact, he owns his own Catholic parish. It's not in communion with the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. Only Mel and his kind go to his Malibu parish. Now, I'm kind of puzzled why we're the bad guys and he's the good guy. He does have a lot of money. They're not getting much out of me. So, at any rate, it was a very, I would have to say, it was a very discouraging time for us. And it's one of the reasons that I just spent all this time. I appreciate the Yiddish proverb that learning requires a talent for sitting. And writing a book really requires a lot of talent for sitting, but I wrote this book not just because of Mel Gibson, but because I really want people to understand how important it is that we get it right, how we interpret the gospel text about the death of Jesus. And at the same time, I want to recognize, in a sense, I guess I can owe part of the book to the people who, for their piety, because before I start the critique of what has happened because of the way that we have read the Gospels and the consequences for Jews, I start with the power that's in the story of the Passion, and why it's such a liberating story for many Christians, and what its most positive value is. And then I conclude the book by going back to two Christian sort of ways of spirituality to try to connect scholarship and piety. Because I think as a woman of faith that we have to hold both together. And just to give one example of what I think is the power, a number of years ago I was privileged to be with my friend and Jewish educator of many, many years, Sarah Lee, and we went to Auschwitz together. And of course that's an extraordinarily, I mean, to say it's sobering is, I mean, that's sort of a pathetic understatement. But one of the things that struck me when I got back home, I had bought a book in the museum, and there's a photo of the standing cell block. This would have been mostly for Polish prisoners in Auschwitz I. And you can see only in the book that carved into the wall, these prisoners were they were made to stand for days and nights on end, squeezed together, I think 4 in this block. So there would have been literally no wiggle room. It must have been an incredible torture. And you can see that one prisoner has etched, maybe with a fingernail, a crucifix. And I think that says something about that story of the Passion of Jesus was for that prisoner. I mean, all I'm going on is a photograph, but the way I read it is for that prisoner, this story helped to sustain him. And I think that is the case for many Christians over time. So thus the delicacy of the dialogue, this is our most sacred story. And we start with critique, it will not be heard in the same way. So before you wash your dirty linen in public, which is one of my favorite lines from Sister Rose in the film, you also need to make it possible to be heard. Enough.
I'll just respond very briefly to Blue's comment and sort of what's going on out there. When I was in high school, 1982, I had a teacher for scripture. And his name was Edward Levash. And he may have studied here, I'm not sure. But this was Catholic school, Brahms Catholic, and how many years ago that was. We were not nice to Mr. Levash, but it had nothing to do with his message. It was because we were high school boys. But he would read the scriptures much like Dr. Boyes is talking to us today about. And he would tell us we are all Jewish in our roots. He would say that all the time. And he would get rid of the deicide charge ad nauseum, ad infinitum. He would make us understand that this was not an acceptable way to read the scriptures. And so this is, 40 years ago almost at this point. No, 30, I'm bad at math, but it's a long time ago at this point. And so there is, these are good things that do happen. And for someone like me who grew up in that world, it's sort of shocking to still know that so much of the other is there, right? So much of the opposite is still present. It's kind of slightly discouraging too, I suppose.
So I know that Nostra Aetate teaches, and the documents following, that Jesus died for all humanity. That was the choice. It was Jesus' independent, no, that's not the word I'm looking for, but it was a personal choice. And yet, and here it is, 40 years later, for me, since I entered in 1965, the way I began in my Jewish-Christian interfaith activity was, as I said before, in a way my life was saved by the deicide charge because my grandfather came here, and my career actually was foisted, furthered by Pope John the 23rd, because as a result of the teachings of Nostra Aetate, which required or recommended from then on that Jews teach courses in Judaism in Catholic institutions. And Yitz and I were invited to teach at the College of Mount St. Vincent, which until that time had taught a course in Judaism. The course in Judaism was taught by a priest, as was the case in most other Christian seminaries. Christianity was taught by Christians, and so that began our interfaith work. But I still have this reaction, not to a cross, but when I see Jesus on the cross with the head hanging low and the body stretched out, I feel a moment of fear that I can't get past it. The association, and I say to myself that if I was a Christian looking at that image, I would feel very angry at the people who have been for centuries, accused of that responsibility. So accused of that crime, and so to me, it's so crucial that the new message get out there, and that's what we have to struggle with.
Yes. Can you stand up?
Yes, I'm wearing a cross. Oh, we're going to do it that way. Can you come with me? I'm sorry, but I'm wearing a crucifix.
We don't think it that way, I'm sorry. We believe that in suffering, the sufferings that we experience in life, that would heal us. That's how we Catholics believe. We don't think about anti-Semitism, though I know that there's anti-Semitism in my country. I agree with that. But when we pray that Jesus' suffering heals us, it's a gift for us because we would deal with our suffering, our daily burdens, and we are healed. It's for healing. That's how we believe. We respect all religions, but it is a gift for us because all the daily sufferings, the burdens that we have are healed, and Jesus heals us. That's our belief. Thank you.
My name is Marcia. My question is about the power of an image. Because in Judaism, we don't have an image. And I went to a friend's daughter wedding. It was beautiful. It was gorgeous. It was in the church. And my question was, why is this suffering image? So, and in the movie industry, it's an image. It's just a friend, my dentist, when I came to the States from Israel, and he said to me, in Israel there is no snow. And I said, why not? He said, because in Exodus, Moses walks with sandals.
You want to respond to the power of an image?
Just actually the last two comments I think share a great deal in common, and I think this is a very important moment in dialogue. That one of the things that is characteristic of the asymmetry between Christianity and Judaism, or at least many forms of Christianity and many forms of Judaism, since there's a lot of diversity, is the realm of the symbol. And symbols they're very deep, and you can't necessarily explain them. So I don't think the crucifix only means suffering. I think one of the things that we might redirect Christian piety toward is that when we see the crucifix, we might ask, who has suffered because of how we interpreted this symbol? It's not just like in the spiritual exercises of Ignatius of Loyola, where we look at the crucifix and we think about our own personal sin, but let's think about our corporate sin, our communal sin of anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism. But I think the thing that's helpful is when Jews and Christians who are neighbors or, friends, ask one another, what does this mean to you? And I understand, I think what Lou just said is entirely rational. But symbols don't function just as rational entities. And at least in the Catholic tradition, we have all kinds of imagery. We have all kinds of material stuff. And beyond that, depending on our culture, like the parish church, I've recently left the parish that I belonged to for many years because there's been a change, and now it's a shul I don't go to anymore. But in my new shul, there are many people from the Dominican Republic. And they have devotions, which I respect, but they're not my heritage. I'm a hopelessly Anglo-Saxon Celtic, northern repressed person. And so when they're, so they've got this side altar with all of this, I don't get it inside, but I respect their use of symbols. And so it's sort of like, I think, how Jews could look on us Christians in that sense, that I don't get the cross, I don't get the crucifixion. I wear a cross, but usually when I go to Jewish Christian events, I don't wear it out. When I teach over at Jewish Theological Seminary, where I co-teach nearly every year, I don't have my cross out. Well, this is a menorah. This is the multivalence of symbols, right? This is a menorah, or it's a tree of life. Interesting, the tree of life from the book of Proverbs, Eitz Hayim. But the cross is also regarded in Christianity as the Eitz Hayim. And the tree of life is a symbol that cuts across virtually all cultures. So what is it, a menorah or a tree of life? Does it really matter? I try to be careful about symbols because I think one of the things, because Christianity is rooted in biblical Israel, is that we have taken many, we've in a sense borrowed, we've kept the Hebrew scriptures as our own and then added a skinny book of Midrash, as one of my scholar friends used to call the New Testament. Is not to take somebody else's symbol. So I don't light a menorah at Hanukkah. I don't, but a very close Jewish friend of mine came to my house for dinner in December. And she brought me a mezuzah. And she said to me, I didn't put a text in it because I want you to choose the text. I haven't decided yet, but she's a scholar of Judaism, and I received, so it will eventually go up. She thought maybe outside my office. I'm not sure Union's ready for that, but I think it'll go up outside my apartment. And I remember Rose, right? She had that mezuzah.
Paula and then Anne, please.
Just comment to Blue and then address to Sister Boys and Dr. Anthony. Blue, I as a Christian find it very disturbing that you have actually a gut response to seeing a crucifix. That's very disturbing. And my question to the Christian theologians is that the crucifixion story, the Passion story, may be our most sacred text, but it's not actually the most important theologically. I think it's the Easter story. And why is it that that hasn't sunk in and become so many? There are many depictions of the cross, and in fact, my personal preference is the Sister Rose depiction. But there are many crosses that are empty. They're at Easter time. They're draped with white, showing the death of Jesus' death. And then, so could I ask discuss some comment on that?
I have to say it was a little hard to hear the question, but I think it has to do with why so much focus on the suffering and on the crucifixion. Of course, many, especially Protestant churches, simply have a cross without the corpus on it. And there's a little sensibility there that has to do with the Reformation and the use of imagery and so forth. And I think the question also was, I said, why not more emphasis on the resurrection? I suspect, not thinking theologically, but thinking artistically here, it's a lot harder to depict. How do you, so you will see, especially in modern churches, you may have a crucifix that's kind of also of the risen Christ. There's some remarkably bad Christian art. And there's some remarkably beautiful Christian art, and not every church, unfortunately, has the latter, but the former. In seminar, and I was walking at a break with a Jewish colleague there, and we went into this church outside of Rome, and it had every statue in a primary color you could possibly, it was just, and my Jewish colleague instinctively just recoiled, and she's, look at all the idols. And I said, Marcy, just think of them as tchotchkes. Different sensibilities.
My answer is a little bit different. I think that's absolutely true. I mean, the resurrection is obviously more difficult to depict than the crucifixion. I remember one of my professors a long time ago said that the church can't be all resurrection. And so I wonder, it's an odd thing. Sometimes these things are generational experiences too, Paula. When I was growing up after the council and in the 1970s church, frankly, any kind of emphasis on suffering and sin and all of that was gone from my experience, okay? And that's a very particular kind of sort of suburban church, So it was all resurrection, kumbaya, we're all happy, and then happy clappy, we call it, in my family. And certainly the church I attend now is very resurrection oriented in almost everything it does, really. So it's interesting. I think to some extent that is a generational experiential thing as well. What gets emphasized, what sort of piety is really powerful in the church at any particular moment and in a particular area, right? Did you want to? I'm sorry.
It's okay, no, I saw your hand.
I had a question. You use the term, talk about symbols, but also words are important. Could you address anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism? They're two very different things.
No, actually, I don't know if they're two very different things. I mean, anti-Judaism implies that it's the philosophy of Judaism, it's Judaism as a religion, and anti-Semitism implies that it's the people of the Semites are Jews. Semite is not a religion, it is a people. So I think that maybe is the distinction, but I think the lines are very blurred, and I'm not sure whether anti-Judaism is so clean-cut as to say that it's only against the religion. I think it's also the people who hold that religion. It spills over. And that's that's just off the top of my head, since I've never really thought about that. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I've thought about it, and I've tried to sort it out, and I would say it's a distinction without a difference in terms of consequences. I guess my one simplistic way would be anti-Judaism is tied to Christian denigration of Jews and Judaism. It comes out of Christian theological or Christian religious practice. But anti-Semitism is not necessarily connected to Christianity in any kind of formal way, and you can be an anti-Semite without being a Christian. But anti-Judaism, I think, is
You can be anti-Judaism without being Christian also today, unfortunately.
probably also in that sense, yes. I think
Wasn't anti-Judaism.
right. But as the term is used, it's really pretty much only used anti-Judaism with Christian theology, sort of historically. But in terms of consequences for Jews, they come down to the same thing. And what we saw in the Holocaust is how the centuries of anti-Jewish preaching and teaching provided this fertile seedbed for the reception of the pagan ideology of the Nazis, or the anti-Semitic ideology.
Okay, one more. Yes, please.
Can you all hear me?
Thank you.
This is one of my favorite subjects. You are both just so remarkable. It's incredible. To those of you who grew up in Jewish homes, maybe not.
Come to the microphone.
When I was a little girl, my grandfather, the cantor, whose father was a rabbi, said to me, if you take 3 Jewish rabbis and you put them in a room, they will never agree. And I see as you, right? And now my mentor, who's a Lubavitcher rabbi, says the same thing to me. Take 3 rabbis, put them in a room, they're never going to agree. And that goes even a little farther if you talk about Reform, Reconstructionist, Orthodox, and Conservative. When I think about what we've been talking about today, I sometimes think about how religion, as Mark said, is the opiate of the people. So people follow. They follow because they want something to follow. They follow because they want something to believe in. Whether it's right, whether it's wrong, they follow. So it really becomes the job of the theologians, of the intellectuals, to inculcate. And it really, in a sense, becomes the job that they do it almost like Jesus did it, to go out among the people. It's not just in the classroom that this happens. I did not know that I was a Jew until I went to college in Texas. Now, I grew up in a neighborhood where everything was closed on Saturday. But that wasn't about being a Jew, that's where we lived. I grew up in a neighborhood where there was no bacon. I hadn't had bacon, not because I didn't like it or couldn't have it, it didn't exist in my world. I grew up in New York, obviously in a Jewish neighborhood. So, my uncle, the rabbi, who was the rabbi at the University of Texas, why he went there, who knows, but he went, said, you know, this would be a wonderful experience, come here. So I go to the University of Texas and suddenly find out I can't pledge a sorority. I can't go to this country club. I can't go here, I can't go there. Which is why I believe that my uncle and my tante wanted me to go there, to see that and to understand it. When we talk about people like Mel Gibson, we're talking about people who want to be entertained and they're willing to sell their values to go see something, and heaven only knows when they actually believe it. What this really comes down to, though, is really about what Sister Rose Thiering did, and I've watched her through the years and admired her. It's about teaching, but it's about the community effort and going back into the streets and teaching. Yes, she started programs to teach Holocaust studies in schools. Sadly, it's virtually not taught in Maplewood, South Orange anymore, and I say that because we are in Maplewood, South Orange. Little bitty, but it's not taught. Now, I'm not going to sit here and give you the reasons why Holocaust is not taught anymore, and there are some somewhat valid reasons. But what this comes down to is, at least to me, there will always be blame for something. And we can say the Jews killed Christ, we can say so and Hitler killed the Jews. You can go and go and go and go. But at a point, people have to put this to rest. Because we weren't there. We're never going to know what really, really happened. What this is not about is going backwards, it's really about humanity going forwards. It's about learning to forgive. It's about learning to study and understand and respect what other people think and feel. It's about not being told that you are wrong because of what you believe, but to say, let's agree to disagree, we can still be together. So I thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Last word?
I did have a last word. Actually, my last word would be too long. I really want to ask both of you what you think are the chances of a quasi-canonical text being developed, and I agree with the last person who spoke about the importance of education and of getting something like that into reality. That's my question. I don't know if we have time anymore for any responses, and then I have one comment.
Well, I will defer to the master.
The exalted chairperson, you want to address this?
I did want to say one thing, which is that it's an announcement, if I might take the opportunity here, which is I've discussed with some members of the Sister Rose Thiering Fund and of a project that I'm involved in, and that is the creation of the naming of a street in Jerusalem after Sister Rose Thiering. She loved Jerusalem. She loved Jerusalem, and it would be a lesson, I think, for all Israelis, for all Jews, for all Christians, a symbol of what her connection was to Israel and the Jewish people. And it would stand as a light for a generation that sometimes feels that it's isolated and alone, that there was a Sister Rose in our lifetimes. I wanted to, I hope to collect 10,000 signatures. It doesn't need that many signatures, but I think there are 10,000 people who would like to sign onto this request to the mayoralty of Jerusalem to name a street after Sister Rose. Rehov Sister Rose it would be called in Jerusalem. So if you are interested in this and you would like to be one of the signers, if you would send an email My email is my name, Lou Greenberg, all one word, @gmail, and put in the subject line, Sister Rose Thiering, Sister Rose Street. And I will send you back the form, and then you can send it back to me. So that is my announcement.
It's Blue Greenberg, BLUGREENBERG @gmail.com. Thank you, Blue. Thank you all so much, Sister Mary, Blue, Tony. This is a wonderful, wonderful afternoon. We are going to feed you because this is a Jewish Christian program after all. And I also want everyone to know that Dr. Boyce will be signing her book back over at the tables over there for purchase. And And Blue Greenberg's books did not arrive, but if you want to have copies of them and signed, you can sign a piece of paper over at the tables also. We will make sure we send it to you. One more note, our Evening of Roses is going to be on Sunday, May 4th. We're honoring the founders of the Sister Rose Thiering Fund. It's going to be a wonderful afternoon. You can go onto our website to get all the information about tickets, ads for the ad journal. And also on April 27th, the South Orange Maplewood Interfaith Holocaust Remembrance Program, which Sister Rose was very much involved with forming 37 years ago, will be at Temple Shara Tefillah, Israel, and South Orange. Thank you all for being with us this year, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.
She spoke many times in my classroom in Millbury Middle School. And every time she began her talk, she'd say, if someone told me this story, I wouldn't believe him. Because her story of the tragedies that she experienced, both psychologically and physically, are unbelievable. Marcia defied death many times. And frequently she asked herself, why did I survive? I always gave her the same answer. So you could tell the story as an eyewitness. She has spoken to 3 generations of people. But I'm going to tell you about a happy experience today. I want to take you back to May 6, 1945. World War II is ending, and Marcia's a girl of 18 years old, an exhausted prisoner at Mauthausen concentration camp. She's given up on hope. She is standing still slightly alive at the door of the crematorium. The German guards have dispensed with gassing victims because they know the American troops are coming, and they're throwing the victims alive into the fire. She's at the door, but she doesn't care. Standing in front of the door of death, she faints, and she knows she's picked up by someone from the 11th Armored Division of the United States 3rd Army. He carries her to an ambulance. She never sees him again. But she swears that she wants to find a liberator who was at Mauthausen concentration camp on May 6, 1945. 5 years ago, I took her to West Caldwell Library, where a teacher friend of mine, John Pascal, who teaches at Seton Hall Prep, was showing a slideshow of his trip to the concentration camps. And at the end of his presentation, he said to the people in the group, there were parents from Seton Hall, Holocaust survivors, children of Holocaust survivors. John Pascal said, don't thank me. Thank the Holocaust survivors and their children who were in the audience. And he ended his presentation, and a gentleman came up to Marcia and said, what camps are you in? And she went through the 4 camps, and she was liberated at Mauthausen. And this man says, my father was a liberator at Mauthausen. And both Marcia and I shuddered. And then he says, he told us lots of stories, but one story he told was about a young girl at the door to the crematorium that fainted, and he took her to the ambulance. By this time, we're sobbing, both of us. And that man was Kenneth Hanlon. He was part of the 11th Division, 41st Cavalry of the United States Army. He's gone now, but his son is with us today. And his name is Wayne Hanlon. He's here with his wife, Melinda. We don't know for sure if this really was the combination that day in 1945, but we like to think it. The story goes on. Marcia's not giving up. And she was going to tell this part, but I'm just going to fill in very quickly. She sees an article in the Star Ledger of a couple married 65 years, Joseph and Ann Barbella. And she sees he was from the 11th Armored Division, which liberated Mauthausen. She knows they're from Roselle Park and moved to Union in 1956. Marcia lived a few blocks from this man and never met him. So she gets in the phone book, whatever, and she finds where he is and she calls him up and they meet. And it is a wonderful story of two people reunited after, do the math, 1945 to 2013. 68 years, thank you. And Mr. Barbella is not that well right now. He knew he wouldn't be here today. Marcia's still great at 90. I've been at her deathbed, or so they called it, a couple times, but I knew she was gonna make it. There are copies of this story for you. You can go online, NewJersey.com, StarLedgerCup.com, put in Marcia Krusman, and see the story. I wanted to tell you that. I want to invite Mr. Hanlon up.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here tonight, this afternoon actually. First of all, I think it was a great presentation, but it gives us an opportunity to talk about what we all have in common. I know my dad, Marcia, had tremendous courage, tremendous faith. They come from different faiths, but their will to survive, their will to do what was right and believe in what was right is what was really important. So thank you all. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Kenneth. Thank you to our presenters. Inspirational. And I kept on hearing Sister Rose's voice. Thank you.